You're listening to the Empowering Process podcast with your host, Gail Kraft. Listen as she holds frank discussions around how your purpose, being present, and trusting your power impacts your life. Whether you're an entrepreneur, leader, or developing your vision, you'll find wisdom and insights you can utilize right now. Welcome your host, Gail Kraft.
Process podcast, and I want you to join me today with this amazing woman. It's Jen Potter, and Jen is a serial entrepreneur, but we're not here to talk about her businesses, though she will tell us about them at the end. We're here to talk about uncovering and unburying shame. And when we were talking beforehand, we literally were, I could taste the dirt. My face is in the dirt because we're digging in to that deep rooted shame. Because I'll tell you, I don't know about you, but for me, it has been in the past buried pretty deep. Welcome, Jane. Thank you so much. Jen, I should say, thank you so much for being brave enough to share your life with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
It's,
nervous and excited.
oh
I
yes,
know
it's
I've said
good.
it before,
I
but
know.
it's an exciting thing to be able to get to that point. And, for everybody listening to this podcast, this was the result of a conversation that we had during our initial call, and having that call really helped kind of see things that I didn't see before. And I'm really grateful for that. So I'm excited.
Oh, and I'm grateful that you're going to share your story with me. And I have so many stories about shame. Um, so I think I'll talk about my first marriage, though there was definitely shame with my second because I didn't address shame till a few years ago, so carried it for a while. But in my first marriage, I married this man and his family. I was in love with his family. I adored his older brother, his wife, his those kids. I was in love with that model that I thought of life. And I assumed that this man and I were going to have what I see his brother having. And we didn't. We didn't. Both of us had, and that'll be in some other story, but we both had our own shit that we brought to this marriage, and we were both broken and didn't know how to heal ourselves. And I did not let people know. I mean, this man was out drinking. He was running around cheating on me. He was spending money before he got home. I mean, I was walking in the snow in Dr. Scholl's. I barely could get diapers for our baby when we had a child. And I told no one what was going on because I was so ashamed of not being able to keep this marriage together. What kind of a woman was I that I couldn't make this man happy no matter what the hell I did? Wow. And so when we divorced, did I take care of that shame? No, I just said, well, that's over with. Don't have to deal with that anymore. Right. And so I carried it and carried it and carried it. It showed up at my second marriage. It showed up in my businesses. It showed up in my relationship. It showed up until I finally faced it. And so, Jen, we're going to talk about the shame that you have buried. And I mean, we buried this one deep.
Yes.
And the digging that you have done and the dirt that you have eaten in order to face it and embrace it.
It's
Because
the
it made,
embracing part is still, it's still a work in progress,
right,
but we're
but it
working on it.
made you who you are, right?
Yes.
Right. So thank you for sharing your story with us, Jen.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for sharing yours as well, because you know firsthand what it's like to hide all of that. And, it takes a strong person to say, I'm holding on to all of this. This is my responsibility. What about his responsibility? We're so quick to absorb somebody else's,
Right.
but not take responsibility for our own. And, looking at the situation that you were in, it was something very similar for me, growing up in the environment that I grew up in, and, continuing to just kind of bury all of those things in my childhood past. And, we talked about this in our pre-interview. When I was younger, I went through a lot of shit. And as I got older, I didn't want anybody to know about it. I kept saying to myself, if my friends know what I went through as a child, they're not going to want to be friends with me. If my husband knows the things about me, he's not going to want to be married to me. And it was funny because we had a conversation the other day, and he goes, I remember the first thing you said to me on our first date. And it was very early on. And he said, I looked at him and I said, whatever you do, do not judge me for my past. That is not me. And that was a very strong statement, coming out of my mouth 13 years ago, where I was like, please don't judge me. Now, I could honestly give a shit if somebody judges me. I don't care what you think of me, because I am at a point in my life that I feel comfortable enough in my own body to own my shit. And
Yay.
whatever shit you're projecting, that's on you. And that's okay. And if you want to project that on me, it's totally cool. I'm not going to accept it. I don't want it. I have my own stuff to deal with. But, after we had our first conversation and numerous conversations, I think I told you with Donnie Bovine, he's going to kill me because I always mess up his last name. And we had a lot of conversations, and he keeps telling me, Jen, you're burying it. You're burying it. I'm writing a book, and I'm like, I'm starting from like my 20s, because I'm like, nobody needs to hear about like my early on shit that I dealt with. And at a very, very early age, I had a very abusive, drug addictive, alcoholic mother. And I had some grandparents that were just in a lot of shit as well. And I just took all of that and I hid it, because my friends had normal parents. My friends had normal grandparents.
You
And
think?
if anybody knew that my grandparents, I do have one living grandfather, so let's throw this out. He is the love of my life. He is the most important person in the whole entire world to me. So this is not him. He's actually my step grandfather, but he's been in my life my entire life since the day I was born. But I have two biological grandparents. Both of them have now since passed, and both of them are pedophiles with like rap sheets a mile long. And that right out the gate was something so embarrassing to me, because if any of my friends' parents knew, like, would they let me hang out with them? Because I have these crazy grandparents, like both of them, awful, awful people. I was saying to someone, I was like, I think I'm going to talk about one of them. And someone else looked at me and was like, you can't talk about that. What if someone comes out? What if someone knows that that's you? And I don't care. I don't care, because it's in the past. It's history. It's what made me the person that I am today. I was so ashamed about their past. And that's fucked up. Like, why am I put in that position? And, and then to boot, my maternal grandfather, he gave birth to my mother, who I don't really have a relationship with. And, she is fucked up beyond repair. And even to this day, we don't have a relationship. And she always tells me, she's like, I'm so sorry I messed everything up. And I always tell her to stop apologizing. I say, thank you for making me the person I am. I would not be the person I am today if the things that happened as a child didn't happen to me. And I'm okay with that now. I mean, no child should have to go through what they went through that I personally did. But at the same time, it was that acceptance. And it was beautiful, because yes, it was fucked up, but at the same time, I'm able to help other people. By me talking about this, that you are not the only person that went through a shitty divorce. You are not the only person that could not put a diaper on a child, could not take care of your marriage. You are not the only person. But when you're going through it, you think you're the only person. If anybody knows that I am going through this, they are going to judge me all day long, and I'm not going to be the person that they think I am.
Right. We were talking earlier, and the words anger, judgment, and isolation come up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you're angry at the situation that you're in, and you're angry at yourself for not being able to handle things. You're afraid of judgment from others. Meanwhile, you're judging yourself, and you isolate yourself. You feel isolated because you are isolated, right? So, and all of that has the root of shame.
Oh, absolutely. Because when you're living in that that isolation and you're in your own head, you're like, it's only me. What if somebody knows? Oh no, like so and so is going to think something different of me. I may lose a job. I may lose a client. And it's funny because now, I make light of it, and, not all of it's funny. A lot of it is pretty shitty, but when I talk about things that happen in my own personal life, I bring things to social media, and I'm slowly building up, to kind of prepare people for the things that I'm going to be talking about in the future. But when I talk about things that are happening to me, everyone's like, oh no, I'm so sorry. For what?
Right?
Why you, like, I said, just like to my biological mother, why are you apologizing to me for the shit that I'm going through? I've accepted it. Nobody owes me an apology. And I think, apologies are pretty funny, just to kind of divert for a minute. But I have a good friend who was a life coach a few years back. I was going through so much shit. This is where all my shame became uncovered. And, my marriage was falling apart. And thankfully, everything is great now. But it's because I wasn't working on me.
Right.
I was projecting on other people. I was looking for all the negative things. And one of the things that she would always say to me when I would talk, because I'd be like, oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm going through this and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, Jen, stop apologizing. Stop apologizing and say thank you. And it's funny because it was that sentence that Lauren kept saying to me that has changed my perspective on how I view things, how an apology should be handled. Going back to shame, what am I sorry for?
Right.
Why am I sorry and ashamed of the things that someone else did to me? And even if they are sorry, are they really sorry? Don't apologize for those things. Accept what you're going through, learn from it, teach somebody else, how to get through it. It's not easy as a child. Some of the things that I can personally say that I was ashamed of growing up. My mom she was a beater. Like, she abused me. She punched me and hit me and broke my nose a few times, threw me down flights of stairs. After my biological paternal grandmother passed away, I was distraught. She was like the best person in the whole world. And I was so distraught that she handed me a knife and told me to kill myself. And I remember being like 8 or 9 years old, sitting there with, like those fancy, I remember the knife so well. It was like, the infomercials with those little tiny like paring knives. It was like one of those. And it had a white handle. And I remember her looking at me just going, well, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. And she slit my wrists and then told my father I did it. And as I got older, I brought these things up to my dad, and it's almost like my dad didn't even realize that these things were happening.
Oh, yes,
And
denial, definitely.
there was so much denial, with my biological mom and him, and because he worked 24/7 to, feed us and take care of us, that he wasn't always home. And that was just one of the things that has happened. And like every time something happened to me or I would get hurt, my mother would be like, well, if you tell him that I did it, I'll kill them in their sleep. And I would be like, okay, so I did it. I did these awful things. Or we would just never talk about it because my dad worked so much that my dad would never see me. So it was just, I started holding on to all of these things at such an early age that it started to build inside of me that if anybody knew that this was happening in my home, I could never have friends. I could, I said that before, like nobody would let me hang out with the other kids in the neighborhood, even though like I grew up in the poorest neighborhoods in the area that I grew up in. And I was literally like one of the only white kids growing up, like where we grew up. And it was, for me, all of like this neighborhood and these people that I was around, they were the ones protecting me. I felt so safe and in such an environment that most people wouldn't.
I was a gang
Because
kid. Yep.
yeah. And I tell people, and it's so funny. I always tell people, I'm like, oh, I grew up in this area of New Bedford. And they're like, you're the pasty white girl. Like, you grew up in that neighborhood? I go, oh yeah, all of my friends, like this is where we grew up and these are all my friends. And this is, guns were normal, shootings were normal, like drive-bys were normal, like those things were normal to me. And as I got older, I started realizing, I'm like, oh, this isn't normal. Living in these areas and going through the things that I went through, they're not normal. But then again, what is normal, right?
Right.
I feel like we're all fucked up on different levels. When someone says like, I want to be normal, I'm like, I want to know what normal is.
I was going to say, you just show me someone who's normal and I'll show you someone who's lying.
Yeah. And even in the best, like I look at my own kids and I'm like, man, I hope I don't fuck them up. And I think about it all the time. I'm like, what can I do to make sure that my kids don't turn into little assholes, but still grow up to be good human beings and actually have a good experience? But I feel like everybody has some type of shit. Everybody has some type of shame. And what I consider shame and what you consider shame, or anybody else listening, they're so different, right? We all have different instances that we relate to. Mine's kind of extreme, but someone having, even a verbally abusive parent, that is just as deep as someone beating the shit out of you.
Right.
And that doesn't always, some people always feel like, oh, well, my shame's not as deep as Jen, so therefore, like,
and that's
I'm gonna be
judgment
judged.
and right. So there's a
Yes.
shame showing up right there.
Oh yeah. And
Right.
that happens when I talk to people. And I when I tell my stories, I go, listen, I'm not telling you a story for sympathy. I don't need sympathy. I'm fine. I think I'm fine. And but it's more so for me to tell you you're not alone.
Right.
Every story I tell, every post that I post is to remind every other person I'm okay. I'm dealing with my shit. But there are other people who can't deal with it, that are struggling to deal with it, that need someone to be relatable so they can get it off their chest. And, I get so many messages and so many um, emails from people that are like, hey, I just, I need to tell you this. This is so random. People come up to me and they're like, I don't know why, but I need to tell you blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And they just come out and they tell me, and I'm like, all right, that's cool. What can I do to help? And there's never any judgment. And I say that to people all the time. I'm like, I'm going to tell you how I feel, but just know whatever you're going through, I will never judge you, because I don't want to be judged, or I don't really care if I'm being judged.
Well, and you
Because
don't know their history. You don't
yes,
know what brought them. I'll flip that around a little bit around judgment. On my 10th anniversary from class reunion, the girls that hung around together in high school, we got together, left husbands alone, and we went together. It's the only reunion I went to. And one of them, she got married right out of high school, married a guy who was a lobsterman, moved to Maine, lived on an island, whatever. During that time was when I had left the man that I was talking about. I was on welfare for about 3 months. So I was on welfare at the time and looking for a job so that I could support my daughter and me and move forward in my life. And this woman said to me, I admire you and your life. And I looked at her and said, don't you ever envy anyone else's position, because you don't know the shit they went through to get there.
right.
Take care of your own shit and don't ever judge or admire someone else's, because what I'm going through is not admirable. It's rough
Right.
and it sucks. Right?
Oh, it's so true. It's so easy to want to live someone else's life. It's, that common saying, the grass isn't always greener. It's not, in being where you are in your own life and accepting where you are and loving where you are in the moment.
Right.
I feel like when I finally got to that point of loving everything about where I am, everything about everything that I have, because it's only right now in the moment. Someone was like, you know, I've been married for, X amount of years, and, I just don't know if I'm going to spend the rest of my life with my husband and blah, blah, blah. I go, well, that's the goal. The goal is to be there. But what's your goal today? Where are you today? Where are you in your marriage today? Because I can tell you what today's like, but I can't tell you what 5 years from now is going to look like. We change, like our lives change. We talked about this before. Our friendships change,
Right.
relationships and friendships. It's okay to say goodbye to a friend. It's okay to say goodbye to a partner.
Right.
People are going to come into our lives for certain reasons. I'm a big believer in the universe. I listen to the
Oh,
universe. It's
yes.
how me and you met, through a mutual friend.
So random. Yeah.
Yes, who was like, you two need to talk. And then I told you, from the day we had our first conversation, first 5 minutes, I'm like, how have we not been friends sooner? Like, everything about our conversation just left me so inspired, because I felt like I've connected on that level with someone who was very similar to me, going through completely different shit,
Right.
but you understood. You understood me. And not that I'm seeking people to understand me, because I know I'm a complex individual, but it's so amazing to find someone else who can connect with you on that level, who understands shame, who
Right.
understands the shit that we go through, and there's no judgment. Because as much as I say I am not a judgmental person, I know I'm not, we're surrounded by judgmental people. And I can only hope to change views of other people to feel the same way, because it's such an empowering thing. When you stop judging and start observing and really starting to look at things as they are, like you said, the grass isn't greener. Don't admire someone else. You may, people look at, oh, I wish I had all the money of Elon Musk. Do you though? Because what does he have to go through on a daily basis?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does,
No, thank you.
just because they have money, it doesn't mean they're happy. Just because, I have a nice house and I don't live in the projects, that doesn't mean, I'm better than somebody else. I grew up in the projects, and it makes me appreciate the things that I have, and everything in life is temporary. I may be here now. Where am I going to be in 5 years? I don't know.
And change is constant. It's
Absolutely.
absolutely constant. And the thing about guilt is when we embrace it. So I'm all about embracing the shadow. I say embracing the dark side, it's the shadow, right? If you are standing in the light, then you're casting a shadow, guys. Come on. It's the law of polarity. It's a universal law, right? You can't escape it.
Right.
But when you realize that you cast this shadow, and that shadow is who you are, then you're like Peter Pan and you want to go chase that shadow. You don't want to
Right.
lose it, because it is so important to,
Absolutely.
right, to your character, to your gift, right,
Right.
to your compassion, to your relatability, to being the person that you're put on this earth to be, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
And truly owning it. And, with it, when talking about that, exactly, there was something that you recently owned, your new title,
Right?
and you wouldn't have been able to own that new title. And what is it again? I just
I'm
want to hear you say it.
I'm an empowerment master.
Yes, and you've become an empowerment master because of the shit that you went through. You become the master of something that you had to really truly own,
Right?
accept, and teach other people how to do the same thing. And we talked about this before too, was the interview that I listened to with Gabby Bernstein. And she said that the people who are the best masters and teachers are the ones who have gone through all of their shit. I
Yeah.
can't empower someone to be a stronger, better person if I don't go through certain things or have gone through the past that I've gone through. Other people have fucked up histories, and they need to know that it's okay,
Right?
that it's okay to own your shit. But if you have someone who's never gone through that trying to be like, you can be the best person you can possibly be, that they're not going to inspire me. Like, your background, and yes, you may be great at what you do, but if you come from a different place than I have come from, you may not necessarily inspire me. You may not necessarily make me want to be the best person I'm supposed to be. I want to surround myself with other people, not just because they're fucked up, but other people who have gone through what similar situations that I have gone through and have come out to the other side.
It's coming
Growing
out
up,
to the other side,
yes,
right?
and being the best version of yourself. So I could have turned out so many different ways. Thankfully, like, me and all of my siblings, like, and there's a bunch of us, we all are very successful in our own eyes, what we have determined as success. And, success to me was just not turning into what my mother was.
Right.
That alone was my goal in life. And I was always told, you're going to be just like your mom. You
Oh,
act just like your mom. I am nothing. I mean, if you met this woman, you'd be like, what? We are nothing alike. And, my first goal was not to have a child before the age of 16. I was 30, almost 30. And, that was my first goal. My second goal was to just get through high school. I achieved that. And it took a little while, but I was the first person to graduate from college. It took like an extra 10 years, and maybe right when I was pregnant with my first child. But they were all things that my mother never had the opportunity to achieve. But I don't know if I would have achieved them if I didn't have a mother who didn't. Right.
right.
So
Right.
I look at that and I always say, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for your experiences because it has allowed me to create my own. And I never wanted to turn out like my mom. And everyone would always say, you're going to be just like your mom. You're going to be just like your mom. And it was very hurtful growing up. Even into my 30s, I would still, oh, you're just like your mom. Hold the phones. I haven't lived with my mom since I was like 14 years old, and I'm almost 40. And when people would say, you're just like your mom, I never quite understood, like, what do you mean by that? I mean, resilient, still alive. She's a fighter. So I'm like trying to pull out all like the positive things of this
Right.
this crazy woman, right? But if it wasn't for the things that she did, the things that she put me through, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. And I am so grateful for that. And for the first 25 years of my life, I was ashamed of that. I would even now, and I'm going to say that this is hard for me, when people ask to see pictures of my mom and I pull them up on social media, and I don't get emotional. So we'll forget this. But I I pull the picture up, and it hurts. It hurts because I look at her, and it's almost like I'm sad for her. I'm sad that she never had the opportunity to be a part of my life. I'm sad that she never had because she messed it up. But I'm sad that she also never had the opportunity to live her best life either. And it's hard. I've tried so hard to let that woman come back into my life so many times. And the last time, a drug, this more, I can't even say words because it was really hard for me. But when my middle son was born, I got a phone call from a drug dealer. And it was that moment that I was just like, I'm starting my own family. I can't have my kids subjected to this. If this is the life that you want to live, it's fine. I appreciate it, but I can no longer be a part of this. And I truly had to let that part of my life go. And that was probably one of the biggest things that I was ashamed of. And that was 6 years ago. I was scared to talk about it. I was scared to acknowledge it. I was scared, like, a drug dealer called me and demanded money from me. And that's some fucked up shit. Like, I just had a baby like a week prior.
Right.
And, to get a phone call because all of their stuff is being taken away and now it's my responsibility. I'm like, you're a grown up, you can take care of you. But this was kind of icing on the cake. Like, I will let you know that your grandchildren exist, but that's it. Like, you will never see them. You will never be a part of their lives. When they're older, they can make the decision. But I have made the conscious decision in my life to accept that this is you. I'm no longer going to be ashamed of you, but I am no longer going to have you in my life. And that's when my life started to change.
So Jen, yeah, we are sisters. I left my dad when I was 16. He was invited to be part of my wedding and gave my future husband a hard time, so he was disinvited. I let him know that he had a grandchild. He saw her once. I did not let him know that he had a second grandchild. He was so out of my life that when he was dying, I was the one the nurse called to come. And I had processed. He was the first when I went through personal development. It started at like 21. He was the first release. I did a lot of work on letting him go. And I showed up, and I didn't even know who this man was laying in the bed. And he asked me to tell one of my sisters, tell her I'm sorry, because as mean as he was, she was the one who got the worst shit. And I looked at him and I said, not my job. She needed you then and you didn't show up. She doesn't need you anymore. And so I made him take that karma with him to his grave. But I watched my siblings show up who are older than me turn into 14-year-olds when they walked in that room because they had never dealt with the shit.
Oh, I can see that.
Right. And I was so thankful at that point for that work. And I hadn't dealt with shame, by the way. And I'll tell you a quick story on the last bit of shame. But I had dealt with our relationship to the point where, it didn't matter. It didn't matter to me that he was dying. It didn't matter to me, because it was over a long time ago.
And
Now,
it's amazing when you get to that point. It almost
liberating.
Makes me feel uncomfortable. It's liberating, but it's almost, when people ask, I've accepted it, that it's no longer a thought in my daily life, that when we talk about it, I'll talk about it, but she's not a thought. She's not a concern. And
Right.
when you get to that point, it is liberating, because
Yeah.
I felt like I finally released that from my life. We hold on to it so tight because it's a parent, right?
Right.
And
we're raised thinking we're supposed to honor and love our parents. Now, both my parents have passed. And last December, maybe was it just last year? Maybe it was 2 years ago. Anyway, I had shame come up that wasn't mine, that was theirs, right? But it's part of my DNA. And it kept like, Gail, you need to address this. Gail, you need to address this. So I called a shaman friend of mine and said, what do I do with this? Right? I think I need to go on a journey. And she said, oh, you don't need to go on a journey for this. Just call them down and call shame down and have a conversation about what's going on. So, okay. So I did my little meditation and I said, listen, and it's a shame about being Jewish. And there's a whole story behind how they demonstrated that shame day in and day out for me. And, and I never could understand or relate to it. So it was theirs. Listen, guys, I have to ask you what to do about this. I wanted to go through the roots and I really want to release this. And the two of them went, oh, honey, that's old news. That's over with. And I watched shame disappear. And that was it. Sometimes all we need is validation that it's okay to let go.
And it's hard. It's hard. We can ask someone else for validation, but asking ourselves it's even harder, right? And,
Right.
Asking for permission. And it goes back to those conversations that I had with a few other people, but Donnie did the same thing with me. He's like, you need to write yourself a letter and you need to get permission to release these things. And it's okay to talk about the past. And I looked at him, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, why should I do this? Like, I'm good. And then I started to do it and I started crying and I sent him a message and I'm like, I hate you. Why did you make me do this? Yeah. And that was like my response. And he's like, you're welcome. And, Donnie has been such a great mentor for me, not just in business, but to really help me to start to break through the person that I am meant to be.
Right.
And we all need that person, right? And I've had so many amazing mentors to kind of guide me, not just through business, but self-growth. And having someone who truly understands what it's like to go through and help me to release that. And now I'm at a point in my life where I can do that for others.
Right.
And I never thought that I would be that person. I say to my husband all the time, I'm like, people actually listen to my advice. And, which is a funny conversation. And so I'm like, sometimes I just have to be careful of how I say things because people actually listen to me. And which is great because I'd like to think I give good advice, but my first word of advice is don't listen to anyone else's advice. And that's usually my first sentence. I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, do not listen to anyone else's advice. However, if you ask me,
right,
I am going to tell you my opinion. I'm going to tell you what I think, but that doesn't mean you have to listen to me.
I always say, this is from my perspective. This is from my experience.
Yes.
Take it the way you want. right?
Absolutely.
Right.
And, and I think because we have a different perspective, I would like to hope that I'm helping people to make positive, amazing changes in their lives.
Right.
And I know that that's what I'm meant to do. And I was so scared of that. I use this in previous conversations. I was so scared to accept the person that I already am, if that makes any sense. You
Yes.
know, I, I'm like, I'm scared of being a motivational speaker. And the response would be in our groups, but you are a motivational speaker. Well, what do I talk about? Well, what do you talk about? I'm like, I don't know. I'm having a really hard time coming up with a topic. You talk about this stuff all the time. And we get we get so stuck in our own world and our own heads that it's hard sometimes. We get tripped up because we want to help other people so badly sometimes and not realizing that we're already doing it. I'm like, why am I trying harder to do something I'm already doing? Oh yeah, you're right. I am doing this. Like right before the show, I'm like, I'm so nervous. I'm like, about what?
But well, you're having a conversation with Gail. That's all.
It's excitement. I keep reminding myself when I'm nervous, I'm excited. But
Right.
every time I go to talk, I always get a little bit of, I get nervous because I'm like, what if I trip up? And I did a few times and for a split second, I'm like, oh, someone's going to listen to this and they're going to think, oh, I stumbled or I tripped up. And then going, wait, we're talking about shame and talking about things that we hold on to. It's normal to trip up. It's normal to be nervous. And we often forget that sometimes. And I think it's so important for people who are listening to understand that, right? We're human.
Right.
We make mistakes. We do things. And mistakes are, that's a whole nother topic I could talk about forever. But I don't believe in actual mistakes. I believe in learning experiences. It's only a mistake if you don't learn from it. And shit, I have hundreds. So but the list of mistakes are
I have
actually really
failed
small.
so many times. I am now an expert. I am a master.
Yes.
Right?
Falling on
Right.
our faces, it's important. It humbles us. It teaches us, how to get back up. And, when I think of failing, I've created this analogy in my head and I use it whenever I talk about flying. My goal in the next few years is to get a plane. I want to learn how to fly so bad. Like flying to me just seems like the most amazing thing in the world. Being up there, once I'm in the air, love being in the air. Coming down, absolute love coming down. Going up, when I am in a seat in an airplane, I am like, my hands are sweating. I'm like, like everything about me, I'm like sweating, my face is red. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. It's every single time I go up in a plane, and I've flown hundreds of times. And every time I go up, and then I started relating it to my actual life. And I think my actual fear, that feeling of falling before I get to the top. And I start thinking about the plane. I'm like, it's my fears are relevant with even just a real plane. I'm like, that fear of falling before I get to where I think I need to be, which I don't even know where that is, but I just know that, I'm coming up somewhere, and that fear of falling flat on my face. But what's the worst case? Worst case scenario, you fail. Worst case scenario, you get back up and do it over again. When people talk about businesses, they're like, what if my business fails? I'm like, well, what if your
What if it
business
doesn't?
doesn't?
Right? What if it
Like,
doesn't?
what if it doesn't? And you're going to learn. I mean, there are so many things that I've done in business. We've talked about that too. Like, I didn't make the right choices. I don't know. Like, did I go with the right insurance company? Did I pick the right CRM? Did I hire the right employees? No, 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 and no. But if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have learned a better way of doing it. I wouldn't have met the
Exactly.
people that I've met. It's
Exactly.
a learning experience. Everything we do, same thing in relationships. I mean, I've had plenty of relationships before I got this far in my life, but I wouldn't know what I want if I didn't ruin all of those other ones.
I call it the smorgasbord. This life is a smorgasbord, and you have the option to eat just one thing and be happy, or try everything on the table and decide what you prefer.
Right. And
I
nothing
want
is
to try
permanent.
everything. Yeah.
Nothing is permanent. Like we said before, everything that we do in life, I am here where I am, and I am happy, and I love everything about every moment that I am in at this moment in time. But that doesn't mean it's not going to change. That doesn't mean that the relationships, like I said, friendships, those are going to change. Where I live, maybe that's going to change. My kids are going to grow up and those things are going to change. The decisions that I make, they're going to change. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm probably going to create lots of other businesses. Those are going to change. The shit that we talk about, I'm sure I'm going to uncover more shit, and
I
of
guarantee
course
you will.
it's there. I got plenty of time,
Right.
if they change, and accepting the change, I think, is the biggest thing, but also being present and living in the moment. It's so easy for us to get caught up in the things of our past, waking up in fear of judgment. And that was where I was for so long in my life. I'd wake up in a panic. And then I started realizing, well, what's that going to do? What me being panicky, what is that going to do? Having anxiety, who is that going to help? And it was like almost like I self-diagnosed myself when it came to like healing myself, where I started saying, I'm going to do these things when I get out of bed. I'm going to meditate when I start panicking about something, when I start thinking, oh my goodness, I have all these bills to pay at 5 o'clock in the morning. The bills are still going to be there at 7 a.m. Why am I stressing out about it? Like everything that happened, there's so many things that happen, and it's acknowledging them in the moment, learning from them, and kind of just getting through it.
When you get to the point where you have uncovered the root of the root and you find that peace, I can't express how gorgeous that feels, how delicious it feels, that love in your heart for yourself, right, is just, I can't describe it because it's so unique, because we weren't raised with it, but it's there
Right.
for us to find.
And when you find it, the appreciation is so different. The way that we feel about ourselves, the way, imaging, right? Body imaging, like self-love. When I look in the mirror, I love everything about that I have on my body. I love my stretch marks. I love the fact that I'm not, super thin and I don't have a flat stomach. And I love just everything about myself. And, sometimes my daughter's like, well, if you love everything about yourself, why do you put on makeup? I'm like, because I like putting on makeup.
Right, because I like,
I'm pretty just the way I am, but I like being fancy. I like putting on my bling earrings. I like I like doing my hair because I just like doing it. I don't need to do it, but I enjoy it. And, trying to teach my daughter those things from a very early age. I don't want her to go through what I went through. I was so self-conscious as a kid, and that I was so ashamed of that. I was always told that I was overweight, but I grew up in a Portuguese household where all they did was feed me. And, so for me, it was just like, wait, you're fat, but you're giving me all of this food. I'm like, what is happening? But I've learned to love my body. I learned to love food and appreciate it. I eat when I'm hungry. And if I want junk food, I'm going to eat junk food. Why? Because I want it.
and sometimes, so it's interesting because I was thinking of that today, and then we'll I promise you guys will end. This morning I was thinking, last night I sat down with, like chips and salsa and whatever. I garbage ate, like more than I typically do. Like, what was that all about? And then I thought, oh, I know why, because I was so careful about what I ate during the day that I was probably hungry because I probably deprived myself of something that I needed, rather than just normally I eat whatever I want to eat. I just don't think about it. But for some reason, yesterday was because I've just come back from a month vacation.
Sounds terrible.
Right? Oh, it was awful. So your body is going to compensate, and sometimes not in a healthy way.
Right.
But that's a whole other subject that we can go on.
Absolutely.
Jen, I want to thank you for sharing your heart and sharing your
Yes, thank
vulnerability,
you.
sharing digging in the dirt with me, and loving the taste of it. Tell everyone how they could get in touch with you if they want to know more.
So if you want to know more, you can reach out to me at, I guess the best way is Jen at mamasandbabysitters.com. You can, go Jen at it's Jen _ live your best life for Instagram. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. Any of my websites, and, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, and we will have all of this in the comments so you guys can get to it. And again, this is Gail Kraft from the Empowering Process podcast. Thank you so much for listening to us. If this raised something for you, if you have a question, comment, and Jen and I will get back together and answer your comment. If you like this, please star it, share it, if you know someone who could learn from it, because there's always information that is here for your growth. Again,
And you
Gail
have so
Kraft.
many amazing episodes, so be
Oh,
sure to check
thank
them
you.
out.
Thank you. The Empowering Process podcast. Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Empowering Process podcast. Be sure to visit Gail at gailcraft.com to learn more about how she serves thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and goal seekers. And remember, if you like this broadcast, be sure to share and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.